power utility Eskom applying for a 16% annual increase in electricity rates. So that's over the next 5 years. Now, the increase will include 13% annual hike for its own needs and a 3% rise to support the introduction of independent power producers. Earlier, we caught up with Group CEO Brian Damas and asked him about coal supply in the country. Let's take a look.
Our assumption for coal increases over the next 5 years would be an average coal increase of 10%. And it's important that we work with the mining industry to make sure that that is achieved, because that's the biggest part and input to electricity prices. If coal goes up higher than inflation, electricity prices will go up higher than inflation. And so that's crucially important that we normalize the situation and contain coal costs to not more than 10%.
Well, Chris Yelland, Managing Director at Publishers, joining the conversation now. So 16% is the big headline number today. Many are saying that it has in fact been increasing. This increase justifies, the negotiating table for nurses to say, okay, we'll only give you 14%. And then Eskom looks like the good guy. What do you take from that kind of comments that's been doing, been in the rumor mills?
I don't think there's that much room for maneuver anymore. Eskom is between a rock and a hard place. It's facing a lot of conflicting pressures, upward pressures. For example, the coal price, as Brian has just mentioned, there's also pressures to reduce carbon emissions. This is forcing more expensive generation technologies, including renewable energy technologies, which come in at much higher price per kilowatt hour than coal. There are pressures in all spheres of the operation. And through this all, they've got to try and minimize the price increase. But really what they're asking for is 1.1 trillion rands of revenue. And that translates back to 16% per annum for 5 years increase over the current revenue. And I must say it's worse than we expected. We expected 14.5%. Per annum for 5 years, that is excluding the carbon tax, and we've got 16% per annum for 5 years, excluding the carbon tax. Well, if the carbon tax comes along, as the Treasury says it will, this could increase to 20%, even 21%. So the situation is worse than expected.
You would think this is going to be a huge shock to the system, or the shock to the industry, if a carbon tax comes in, because it's directly and indirectly when it comes to big industries.
So it would be a massive knock, because the carbon tax, I thought would actually take it, if you got 16 now, would take it well above 20%. And if you add that on over a period of time, it's a very significant. Plus, if you look at the breakdown of the 16%, industries facing an increase which I think is around 21%. So that 16% increase is not uniform for every user. Yes. Industry is effectively going to be paying more, and then they're going to be cross-subsidizing residential users. So if you look at industry on its own, it's facing at this stage a potential 21%. And if you think how industry is struggling, manufacturing sector in South Africa is going backwards, it's losing out against competing imported goods. Sure, it's going to hurt. And then what does industry do? Industry's got little option but to try and pass those increases on to the consumer. So we're ending up with some inflation concerns, some industry competitiveness concerns. It really is a major problem.
Can I just jump in there? Because Brian Damas also mentioned how coal was a significant input cost into the whole production process. Now, people that have listened to me will know our views on this, but there's another reason why we need to be really careful about talking a weak rand outcome. We need to be focused on policies that stabilize this currency, because he's talking about inflation impacts effectively if the price of coal rises by more than 10%. Well, then it's going to translate into electricity prices. Well, coal, correct me if I'm wrong, but is also going to be a parity priced commodity. So if your currency is weakening another 15 to odd 20% through the course of the next year, I mean, it weakened around about what, 18% last year on a trade weighted basis. Another one of those, and suddenly your coal forecasts look horrific compared to this. And you can potentially add another 5 to 10% onto that as well.
And when it comes to Eskom's overall model, there are a lot of assumptions they build into this. Take us through some of those, and which ones, we talk about the coal price, which ones are most sensitive right now?
Well, I mean, one area assumption is that the growth in electricity demand is going to be something like 1.9% per annum for the next 5 years. And I think this is an interesting assumption because, you know, with the kind of increases we're talking about of 16 to 20% per annum for 5 years, demand for electricity could actually decrease quite significantly. Remembering that South Africa has been a destination for energy-intensive industry for many years because of its low electricity prices. And these industries, these energy-intensive industries, are facing massive increases. Just to put it in context, we've had a 3 times increase in the last 5 years, and we're facing another 2.1 times increase in the next 5 years. Total of about 6.5 times increase over a 10-year period. Now, for an energy-intensive industry like ferrochrome, steel, mining, these translate into massive cost increases that could actually inhibit them from further growth, and not only that, could cause the closure of some of these energy-intensive industries, reducing
demand. Are we at that
demand.
point right now, though, that we can actually be moving backwards when it comes to growth rates?
Well, we've seen
of
in the last year, the ferrochrome industry switched off for several months at Eskom's request, but it didn't bother them because world demand for their products happened to be low at the time. But the point is, if you're facing a doubling of your electricity cost, you could decide to close a factory, and some of them have decided to close. And this is a really scary situation, because if we've got less kilowatt hours demand, having to pay for a constant finance cost of plant already built, we're talking about when the demand for electricity decreases, the price of electricity shoots up in order for that less kilowatt hours to fund this fixed interest and capital repayment. The whole issue of stranded assets comes in.